ready to go.
All right. Here we go. Another episode of Grinds My Gears, and we have the wonderful Belinda Karahalios. Thank you for joining me today. I had to practice that like a million times to get your
Yes.
last name right.
You did
Just
it really well, actually.
thank you.
So,
I'm not in the media, so I was like, I'm driving in the car today. I'm like, Karahalios. Say it properly, Ashton. You only got one time.
well done. Well done. No, it's a phonetically correct last name, but it's not my maiden name. So even after Jim and I got married, it was like I would be signing my name and then like spelling it out as I'm signing it. It looked like I was forging something every time. It was
Yeah.
just, but you get used to it. It's
Yeah, you get used to it. Anyway, thank you for joining me today, and I just want to first of all start off by saying thank you for everything that you've done for everybody in the province so far. It's not said enough because first of all, many people don't recognize what you sacrificed and you did, but I do. So I just wanted to say thank you for that.
Thank
Uh,
you.
and I wanted to start today. Well, like because this is a podcast and I'm not like in the media and it's not political and all that kind of stuff. I wanted to start by kind of just talking about the New Blue Party a little bit. Now many people don't even like when I mentioned it to them at this coming up election, they kind of just gave blank stares. So like, what? Who? They didn't really know what it was about, and can you just kind of briefly kind of summarize like how you kind of it started and you and Jim brought it to life for you
Yeah.
guys?
I don't know how brief I can be, but I will try my best. So, we've been involved in politics for a fairly long time, with volunteering, working on policy, things like that. More so, Jim, he was kind of into that nitty gritty, whereas I was more into the volunteering stuff. In 2018, there was the Patrick Brown as the leader of the provincial conservatives, so the PC party of Ontario. And there was some stuff going on with like shady nominations. It's all legit, all in the news. So you can
Yeah,
read about that.
yeah, I have.
Uh,
Yeah,
yeah. And then so then there was a leadership, right?
yeah,
And Doug Ford came out and he sounded great. And we were like, hey, maybe the party isn't dead after all. So I had faith, I had hope, and I threw my hat in the ring to run in Cambridge. And this is a shortened version because there's like
yeah.
more stuff about
Yeah, we'll
Cambridge and
talk
stuff.
we'll talk about all of that more,
Totally.
but like I just want like the shortened version of how you guys came
So
to be,
I
right?
got in. And then COVID happened in 2020 because I won the election in 2018 with the PCs. COVID happened in 2020. I started asking questions.
Yeah,
I was the parliamentary assistant to the Solicitor General, who was the minister responsible for Bill 195, the Reopening Ontario Act, that horrible piece of legislation that gave the PCs the power to do whatever they wanted without any vote, without any debate.
yeah,
So I voted against it.
yeah,
And because I did that, they kicked me out of the party. And so, you're it was surprising. And we took a step back and Jim was like, well, what do you want to do? Right. And I
yeah,
said, well, I'm not stepping down. Like, I'm going to continue my term. I owe that to the people of Cambridge. And I know that we needed a strong voice in the legislature to speak up against these things because nobody else was saying anything about it.
yeah,
Um, so people started reaching out all across the province saying, like, you got to start a party. Like,
yeah,
we do not have a real conservative option in this province anymore. So we did. So we registered the name. It got approved. Then we got the signatures, and I mean
and there you
that's
go.
that's kind of how it started. So
Uh,
it was born.
That's the shortened version. We'll get
Yeah.
into more of the intricacies later, but I wanted to kind of get into like what is it like working with your husband? Because I have a business and like sometimes I'm so busy I ask my wife to do stuff and she's like, oh, I don't want like what is it like what is the dynamic like just having started this and just being with Jim and having to do things with him all day every day to get things going like is there sometimes butting heads that goes on with
That, that's a fabulous question, and I've never been asked that before, and I'm loving that you asked that. So thank
because
you.
I'm not the media. We talk about
That's a
real
real question.
stuff. Yeah.
And it's like it's such a fine balance, right?
Yeah.
And I think anyone who works with their spouse, their husband or their wife knows like it is a fine balance because it's like where does work end and life begin,
Yeah.
right? Like they just kind of overlap all the time. Um, the thing is with politics, especially because politics is so entwined in our everyday lives, and most people don't realize that, but it is like
Yeah.
education, healthcare, like it's there all the time. And I find it really interesting. and he finds it really interesting. And we're able to, because I look at things very differently than Jim does. Jim is very analytical. Like
Yeah.
he's got that law mind, right? He's a lawyer
Yeah.
by trade.
I trade it.
Um, and so we discuss things differently, and I learn a lot from him and he learns from me, and it works out well. I'm not saying it's perfect all the time because that would be lying, right? Like that's just
Yeah.
not possible, but we make it work. And I love working with him in this capacity because when you're in the nitty gritty of politics, it's like a whole different world.
Well,
Really, truly.
it's like I never really when I started my because I'm a professional fighter and athlete, so like it was like when I started doing stuff like this, I was like, okay, I just wanted to talk about sports. I never really thought politics would came in, but then COVID hit, and then the whole world changed, and I'm like, okay, this is something that needs to be talked about. Like it's stressful to me, right? Like as a regular person, like I can go a week or two or three, and I just spoke to Maxime not too long ago, and
4 days ago.
Melissa Landsman, and like I'm stressed out after those conversations, right? So like, how do you guys go about that balance, like where you're at home and you're like eating dinner, and then you're like, okay, Jim, shut up about it, like let's eat dinner.
So I think it's more me because like I wake up and the first thing I do is I read my like little news thing that
Yeah,
I get in the email. It's like the first thing I do when I'm drinking my tea in the morning and I'm reading that. And like it just happens throughout the day, like because I subscribe to emails. And so you're constantly digesting this throughout the day. You go on social media, the people that I follow, the hashtags I follow, it's all by and large political.
yeah,
There are days where it's just like enough. Like I just can't anymore, enough. And so those days I just shut it down and I'll put on some music and I won't look at social media because I've learned to create boundaries when it comes to that stuff because
yeah.
there are times where you could feel really hopeless. Um, and you don't want to get down that rabbit hole, right?
Well,
Because it's
especially in the position that you guys were put in throughout the whole time, it was not like it's rosy for you guys. You guys were pretty much being attacked for the last 2, 3 years, right? So
yeah.
it's not like you're turning it on and they're like, "Yay, Belinda!" It's like she does this again. This crazy lady, this far right. You know what I mean? It's
Oh yeah, no, I get it. Like it was I mean, I think that everything that we were saying as a party and as myself when I was the MPP was very reasonable, right? Like,
yeah.
hey, if you don't want the vaccine,
Don't
don't
take
get
it.
it. You
Yeah,
shouldn't lose your job for it, certainly. And if you want it, it should be available and you should get it. Like, to me, that's very reasonable. And people were like, you're an anti vaxxer. And I'm like, how am I an anti vaxxer? Like, it was very much like, you should be able to choose what's right for you and your body and your family.
yeah.
I wasn't, I mean, it was very bizarre. It was like the Twilight Zone sometimes.
Yeah, and now you have a family too. You're not just you guys aren't just politicians. You have a son as well, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
like, how do you, like and I know this for a fact because other politicians have a terrible home life balance, and sometimes you run into their kids and you're like, well, long story short, my dad sucks. You know what I mean? How do you how do you guys like for example, like look at Doug Ford's daughter, super vocal about
Yeah.
how terrible her dad is, right? How do you kind of he's young. How do you kind of screen him from some of that, and how do you guys kind of make
Yeah.
him realize that that's what you guys do? But if people are talking bad about mom and dad, it's not like don't take it personally, right?
So it's funny because, like, growing up, a lot of people say don't talk religion and politics.
Yeah.
I would throw in don't talk diet stuff either because people get really like, no, paleo is better than whole 30. And
Well,
that's,
I do that all the time. I'm in health and fitness. I don't
yeah,
care.
right. So people are like,
Yeah.
they treat it like a religion, right? I totally get it. Now, I grew up in a family. My parents are immigrants. My mom came from Portugal. My dad is Trinidadian. And we always talked politics, right?
Yeah.
So I'm used to that conversation. So with our little guy, he's only 6.
Yeah.
He is exposed to those conversations occasionally. We do try to shelter him because it can be very heavy, the conversations.
Yeah.
Um, but like when I was the MPP, I would include him when I was going to events if it was family friendly. Just bring him along for the parades and for what other any other things that there were there that I could bring him. I would bring him.
Okay.
I didn't want to just keep him at home or with a sitter. I wanted to include him as much as I could. And because it was such a busy job, like I was up at 5, leaving the house at like 6, not home until 9 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
I'm reading legislation. It was weekends sometimes. It was pretty nuts. And so I would try to make family time as much as I can. He was still doing extracurriculars where we could fit it in.
Yeah.
And if I wasn't able to be with him, Jim was with him. So I hope. I hope that he didn't ever feel like he was lacking or missing.
Yeah.
We're certainly making up for any of that now because, I didn't win the election in June 2nd for reelection. So we are having some family time now, which is lovely.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to include your little ones. And just to be honest, right? Like, politics is a huge part of life.
Yeah. Well,
And
especially and I think it will be for the next 5 to 10 years, especially because of how drastic the world has changed due to this situation,
sure,
right?
people
Uh,
are awake, right? A lot of
yeah.
people who didn't pay attention to politics are now like, oh, hey, I should probably pay attention.
Yeah.
And that doesn't go away quickly because once you are like plugged in to that, it's really hard to unplug.
Now, did you guys find that with the election, which you did really well, by the way, so great job. It's very understated because of how statistics are being spread in the media and in the news. But for the first election, you guys did incredibly well. So congratulations on that. Now, we didn't get any seats,
No,
but like other starting up parties, that all takes time. Did you guys find that a lot of your voting base came from new voters or first time voters?
it was a real mishmash. So it was, and keep in mind, this is like people that I've met when I was working as an MPP and then just like party stuff. So
Yeah.
like our base was disenchanted PC voters who saw the truth, which is that the PC party is actually just another wing of the Liberal Party.
Yeah.
There were some liberals. I had a lot of people who were former liberals helping out. Some NDPers, the ones who felt like, the NDP claimed to be the party for the workers.
Yeah.
And when workers were getting let go, they were like, well, where were you guys? So, and we were there. So we had a lot of NDP, a couple of Greens, and then a lot of people who were just apathetic, like that didn't vote ever.
They just knew that it was time to kind of step up and
That it was time because change happens slowly. And this was great. Like, I mean, yes, like you said, we didn't get any seats. However, we'd only been around for a year and a half. I'm a one-term MPP. Like it was a fairly large splash, considering the tight time constraints we had. And Jim was sick and dealing with cancer and chemotherapy during a large chunk of that development time of the party as well. So the fact that we ran a full slate of candidates, 124, even the Liberals didn't run a full slate, right? Like that in itself is huge. And people don't, if you're not in the nitty gritty, which I totally get that most people aren't,
yeah.
it's a lot of work. And I remember speaking to Mike Schreiner, the leader of the Green Party, because we sat on the same side of the house,
Yeah.
and he had even said, he was like that's a lot of work, Belinda. Like, I don't know how you guys did it. And when you're in it, you don't really think about the work, and then when you look back, you're like, oh my gosh,
Yeah,
that was
you
just
guys did a lot. And I think it's also the other part that people need to consider is that it was the lowest voter turnout and you guys still did that well.
yeah.
So that should show that there is a future for you guys and that people should start paying attention to the message that you're showing because when you have the lowest voter turnout in Ontario history, I believe that that's the case, and you still pull in, 2% plus of the vote,
Mm.
which would have been bigger if it wasn't for some of the other people that's was around, which we can get into later. But, it's still a big deal. So I think that that's very understated, and I think that it's going to bring some sort of fear into the other establishment parties. Like the PPC, like some of the other uh, parties that have started up, and it means that you have to pay attention to you guys now. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that. I think you're bang on there. I really do. And like the lowest voter turnout in Ontario history.
Yeah.
Like, I mean,
And it speaks volumes. So I wanted to get into how this even started, like we were talking about before, where you stood out against the lockdown bill. Thank you for that. Um, and they kicked you out of the caucus. Now, was that a surprise to you, or was it like, did you kind of know that it was coming?
so it's interesting. Like, I don't know how much details you want, but like, so basically,
Give me whatever. We're just
yeah, like,
chatting. Just chat. We're just
so
chatting.
the Solicitor General, who at the time was Sylvia Jones,
Yeah.
she's now the Health Minister.
That,
Um,
that makes yeah.
I'm gonna keep my comments to myself. So she's now the Health Minister. So at the time, she was the Solicitor General, and I was her parliamentary assistant. Um, and so, the thing is, I read everything. Like, I like legislation. I am not a lawyer. That's not my educational background.
Yeah.
But I take things very seriously. So when you when the people of Cambridge elect me and they're like, your job is to help in the constituency and read bills, guess what I'm going to do?
Gonna
And
do
work
it.
in the constituency and read my bills. So I would read every bill that goes gets on the table. So when I found out that the ministry I was working under was tabling this bill, um, and I didn't get to read it before it was tabled, like that in itself is kind of like, well, why
Red
wouldn't I get
flags, right?
it?
Yeah.
Right. So then we get this, I get the bill, I read it, it's a fairly short bill. I'm cross-referencing it, and I'm just like, now this doesn't sound right. Like this bill wants to take away my job and every other MPP's job to vote and to debate and just let Doug Ford and his ministers make all these executive decisions
Yeah.
that's gonna affect every single Ontarian in the province. I'm like, that's not democracy. So like I give the bill to Jim and because he's a lawyer, and I'm
Yeah.
like, can you read this? Because like I must be tired. Like this can't be right. And he's like, oh, let me read it. Let me read it. And he's like, holy crap. Like, yeah, this is a really bad bill. And I'm thinking, I can't vote for this. I can't vote for this.
And
Like
that was your conscience speaking there, right?
100%.
It wasn't like you having some sort of vengeance against the party. It was just like
No.
consciously you're like, in good human faith that this is
Yeah.
not something that I can vote for.
It's because it's a scary thought, right? I'm
Yeah.
like, not one human being on this planet is 100% good. Nobody is. Like,
No.
we can't say that. And so I remember speaking to the Solicitor General, and I was like, like, can we amend the bill? Like, just try and put some and explaining my concerns. And she's like, oh, just trust us. And I was like, just trust you, man. If the NDP or the Liberals put this bill through, you guys would be like tearing your hair out. Like, it's a bad bill. Oh,
Yeah.
just trust us. Okay, okay. So, I'm not trying to talk to the premier. He's ignoring me, won't pick up my phone calls, won't return my calls. I'm calling the staff, I'm calling the House Leader's office. No one is like connecting with me because now he can say, whoa, I don't know how she felt. Right.
Yeah.
So I'm like,
Exactly.
I'm telling a staff too. I'm like, hey, so and so, like, I need to talk to him about this bill. It's not a good bill. So, like, anything that came out in the news where he's like, I had no idea, I was surprised, is a load of baloney.
Well, it's plausible deniability. It's like
Right.
politics 101. I'm not even a politician. I know that.
Ugh.
You just deny it even someone even said, "I didn't hear that. I didn't say
Well,
that."
I don't know.
Yeah.
And it's just like I don't know. Like it drives me crazy. So the day comes, right? And so just to paint the picture, so you've got your legislative chambers and you've got um like it's like picture a rectangle, and on either side there's seats, right? And it's the government is on one side and the opposition and independents are on the other side.
Yeah.
And then outside of the chamber is these like lobbies, right?
Okay.
And so usually how we vote is when it's a recorded vote, which means it goes in the official Hansard transcript. They'll say you stand up when you're ready to vote for yay or nay, and they'll call you, Mr. Mamakwa, Mr. So and so, Mrs.
Yeah.
Karahalios, and you sit down when your name is called. That's how we were doing it. But because of COVID, they were like, no, you have to vote in the lobbies. So what that meant was that you lined up outside the lobbies, you walked in, the clerk recorded your vote, and then you walked out. And so they had a yay lobby and a nay lobby. So all the votes are whipped. And what that means, the PC party, you think that your MPP is voting the way he or she wants or the way you want them to vote. No, they're voting the way the leader wants them to vote.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a whole other kettle of fish that I could get into because that's just like that's a joke in itself.
It's even evident in the federal
Ugh,
space right now, like that, which is so disgusting. But that's another 10-hour discussion
it
of
totally is.
yeah.
And that drives me crazy because, like, you know what? When I campaigned in 2018 with Ford in the PCs, he was like free votes, and I was like, yes, we need free votes. Like,
Yeah.
I get that you have to vote in favor of the budget if you're in the government, totally fine.
Yeah.
But like other things of conscience. Anyway, so there were no free votes. I can tell you that right now. From when I started in 2018 to when they kicked me out in July of 2020, the only vote I got to vote free is the pit bull ban.
Okay.
It was the only one I got to vote on my own without being told how to vote and without being threatened with punishment.
Let's be honest. Nobody cares about that law
No one
right
cared.
now.
Well, there were a couple people, but like it wasn't like, groundbreaking. It wasn't like this, right? It
Oh
wasn't like
yeah.
Bill 195. So, the we've got this new way of voting. It's the middle of July. We're in for the summer session, and I'm sitting in one of my colleagues' offices. I won't say who. And she knows that I'm not comfortable. And there's a handful of them that know that I'm not comfortable. And they're like, Belinda, you just got to vote for it. Like, just plug your nose and vote. And I'm like, I can't do this. I can't look at my volunteers and my supporters in the face and say, that I'm okay with this because I don't know what they're going to do. None of us know what they're going to do, right?
Yeah.
Um, and one particular person who started speaking out after I got kicked out, because I was the first one to speak out against this.
Yeah.
One particular person was like, you're not just going to lose your parliamentary assistant role, you're going to get kicked out of the party. And I'm like, so what, man? Like, they can't fire me. Like, all they can do is kick me out of the party. So, we had a half hour to vote, and I waited until 3 minutes till the bell stopped ringing. And they're calling my phone, like, where is she? Why isn't she voting? So I go downstairs to the second floor, kind of like a James Bond. I'm looking around to see if they're looking for me. And I walk in, and the clerk is surprised to see me because the clerks know what's going on. They know everything's whipped. And they're like, are you in the right lobby? I'm like, yeah. And she's like, oh, it was he. He's like, okay. And he marks me off as an A. And I am so like, I hightail it out of there, like
Yeah.
just like so fast in my high heels. I'm out of there, get my keys, get in the car. And I'm like heading back to Cambridge. I'm like, because I know what's coming
You
next.
know what's
Something's going to
you
happen.
know what's coming. You don't want to be there. You don't
Yeah.
want that fallout, right?
So I got 680 news on because I always do that for my traffic updates when I'm leaving Toronto. And my phone is ringing and it's like someone from the premier's office. I'm like, nope, not touching that.
Yeah.
And then Jim calls and I'm like, hey. And he's like, you okay? I'm like, yeah. Meanwhile, I've like sweat through my blazer. Like I've just, there was so much anxiety,
Yeah.
but like I knew I did the right thing. Like, cause like I knew I did the right thing. And he's like, did you hear? Are you okay? I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. And he's like, did you hear? And I'm like, hear what? And he's like, you got kicked out of the party. I'm like, what? So like, I didn't know. So Jim
Yeah.
told me. And so I got home and it was weird. Like it was just like, and like a couple of the mainstream media, they reached out, but by and large, they kind of wanted to bury this because what I ended up doing was like it brought attention to the bill because
Yeah.
most bills that pass in the legislature, people don't really pay attention to.
No,
Really,
they don't. Like regular people don't have the
no,
time to sit there and scrutinize, and that's why Trudeau gets away with what he gets away with. He squeaks things through when people are sleeping, and
yeah,
does all that kind of shady crap,
yep,
and but by and large, like people are getting up, they're going to work. They don't have the time to sit there and scrutinize the bills. They rely
exactly.
on the elected officials, and
That's what you guys are paying me to do, right?
exactly, and what people are starting to slowly realize now, and like I said this to Max as well, is like there's a massive distrust in the political establishment now, and
Yeah,
it wasn't there before because people weren't paying attention. So
right.
they tended to trust, like I tended to trust whoever I voted for and whoever was in there. Now I'm like, okay, I pretty much you're guilty until proven innocent in terms of a politician at this point in the public's eyes
Yeah.
because uh like you said, everything is basically you're not voting. There's no voting on these things. It's like whoever the leader is, it's that's what they say goes, right?
Which is awful because
Well,
that's not democracy,
it's not
right?
democracy, and then we
No,
and then we have all these political parties and Trudeau and all these other. We're in this for democracy. We're all about democracy. Well, look at the structure that we have in our own province and our provinces in our own country. Like you're out there like begging for Ukraine's democracy when we don't even have it here, right?
no,
And that's why it's important that you did what you did, and like you and Baber and a couple others, like really, like I don't think people understand. Like you literally put your family's livelihood, your living, those kind of things at risk by doing
yeah,
what you did.
yeah.
And
It really puts you out there, right?
yeah,
It-
and the one thing I wanted to kind of ask, I don't really want you to say names because I don't think you should, but were there others that at the time when that was happening wanted to vote against it, but for lack of a better term, they were too chicken shit to do it?
Yeah, totally. Totally. There was at least 10
At
that were
least 10.
like, they agreed that the bill was bad, but they were too afraid to lose their spot in the PC caucus.
In the regular world with regular folks, we call those chicken shits. Like they need to take a hard look in the mirror and realize you have no integrity. Because, like I tell some people that I train with, like martial arts, is like, or like even when this vax mandate was going in, I don't. I'm in a different position because I have my own business.
Yeah.
Nobody can tell me what to do. Where I had grown ass men calling me crying, being like, Ashton, I don't want to do this. My work is doing this, but I have to because I can't lose this job. I'm having a kid, and they're crying, and they like putting people in that position, right? And then to have and what basically, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought, but what
No,
basically what I was telling them is like, at the end of the day, you got to look in the mirror and you have to be happy with the person staring back at you. So
it's so true.
I like, this is the message that we need to put to those people who didn't vote against it, that spoke to you, that you know the person looking back at you in the mirror right now is someone without integrity, and I think that we need to start exposing those people, and
Yeah.
they need to be held accountable for their lack of integrity, because politics, you have to have integrity.
And also, I wish voters would not be so afraid of following this myth of splitting the vote, because I did hear that when I was door knocking. And what they did was they gave Doug Ford a pass. So anytime you voted for the PCs, like if you truly believed in the PC party, okay,
Yeah.
that's fine. But if you were like, well, I'm only voting because I don't want the liberals to get in or whatever that is, you gave him a pass. You said what he did over the last 2 years was okay. And those people that did, who obeyed their leader and not the people they are paid to represent, they were rewarded with another 4 years.
And,
Like,
and I heard Jim talk about this. A lot of other politicians talked about it, but like, splitting the vote, I don't even think that's a thing. I think it's a narrative made by the mainstream media to kind of detract people from voting for the legacy parties that have been around for
exactly.
forever. Because the way I view voting is, I'm typically a conservative minded individual, but I'm not married to the conservative party.
Mhm.
Right? I openly state I haven't voted for them in the last federal. I haven't voted for them in the last provincial. I did previously, but I vote upon values, right? And I think that if Canadians voted according to their values instead of who they liked, or whether it's a popularity contest, or if he's cute or not, or whatever the case it is,
Agree.
right? Exactly. Well, like my wife, she's in the hair industry, and years ago when Trudeau first ran, people voted for him because he had good hair.
Ugh, I wonder how many more votes I could have picked up with my hair. Like, geez, come on, people.
Yeah, but like, that's the myth of splitting the vote is not there. If you vote upon your values, you would actually see a bigger split and divide of vote
Yeah,
in this country, right? Because
yeah,
uh, what I wanted to kind of get to you guys is or ask you and Jim, is like, this narrative that's been painted about like far right, like the New Blue Party is a far right party. Now, we like that piece that what was it, City TV did, and they brought in the LGBTQ SQRP, whatever other friggin' adjectives they have in that shit. I don't care. It's my show. I can say that stuff. Uh, they brought in that person to deliberately discredit you guys and talk as if you guys were some bigots, some anti-gay people. Like, your party has some, like, oh, if this party gets in, we won't be able to get married anymore. We won't be able to have gay rights, right? How do you guys kind of break that narrative? Because, like you said, like the mainstream media doesn't cover you, so it's hard to kind of put it out there and kind of show people that that's bullshit, right?
yeah. And it's funny because door knocking, it was like there were people who actually read our blueprint and looked at my debates, and they're like, clearly, when you read those things or watch my videos, you're like, yeah, they're not far right. They're just normal
Yeah,
people who have ideas and how to make things better. And we're very anti-discrimination, clearly.
yeah.
Um, and then there were others that I'd knock on their door, and this one woman was like, "Oh, you're that far right party." Like, she literally said that, and I stopped and I'm like, well, "What do you mean?" And she's like, "Well, I heard in the news." I'm like, "What'd you hear?" Right? And you just keep asking questions, and she's
Yeah.
like, "Well, I heard that you guys are racist," and I'm like, "My dad's part black." And she's like, "Oh," and I'm like, "What makes us racist?" And she goes, "Bill 67." And I'm like, "You know what Bill 67 is about, right?" So I broke it down for her, and she's like, "Oh." So she took a step back, and she's like, "Well, what about like the anti-vaccine stuff?" I'm like, "Well, why am I anti-vaccine?" And then she started to talk about how she heard that I was telling people not to get vaccinated. I'm like, "I've never said that."
Yeah.
And so then I had to break it down again. And so there are people who, like you said, who will watch the mainstream media and just like eat it for breakfast. They believe every word of it. But when you actually talk to these people and they realize that you are a reasonable human being who have reasons for the arguments that you're making, then they take a step back. And I don't think she voted for me.
Yeah.
But it definitely, you could see like her facial expression and her body language completely changed after we spoke.
Yeah.
But it's incredible. And like they always, like you said, they get certain people from certain I don't want to call it communities because it sounds like we're segregating people again, but like
Yeah.
someone who is from that from the LG.
Let's call it what it is, a woke person.
Right. So they get some from the woke left, right?
Yeah.
And to say like let's paint them a certain light. And it's just it's really ridiculous. And they're really stretching, right? Like
Yeah.
I mean, I've always been I'm like, I don't care what you look like. I don't care about any of those things. If you're a good person, then you're a good person. If you're a jerk, you're a jerk, right? Like I'm not going to treat you a certain way because you look a certain way. That's just not the way I've been
So
raised.
what's the new blue strategy in terms of breaking that kind of picture? Like other than just simply knocking on doors and talking to millions of Ontarians, because that's obviously not feasible.
Not.
Um, but how do you guys kind of break that narrative? Like through thing means like this, or like what are you guys going to be doing in the next couple years while you're getting ready for the next election?
So in person really is always the best, right? It always, always, always. And I think word of mouth is helpful too. Like regular everyday folks that are just like talking like, hey, have you heard about the new Blue Party of Ontario? And did you hear about what, Belinda did when she was elected? And that helps. But this last election, not only was Jim not able to participate in the debates, which would have helped tremendously.
Yeah.
We had, we had 124 candidates. We had a member sitting in the legislature, but they said that he wasn't eligible. We weren't eligible, rather. Yet the Liberals didn't have 124 candidates.
What's the criteria?
It was a candidate in every riding, which we had,
Yeah.
and a member in the legislature, which we had, which was me.
Yeah.
And the Liberals only had 121 candidates, and yet we were denied because they said, well, she wasn't elected as a New Blue; she was elected as a PC. Well, then okay, then why did you let the Liberals participate?
Yeah.
So
Because
like
they didn't
they
have a full slate, right?
they
If
didn't have a full slate. So they bent the rules for the liberals, but they wouldn't. So it's interesting to watch that. So that was challenging. And then in some of our radio ads, some stations wouldn't play our radio ads for whatever reason. And then we had like paper parties that were set up to try to distract from us. Like we would have done so much better if Derek Sloan didn't decide he wanted to all of a sudden leave, come back to Ontario from Alberta, and then stop his federal party and then start a provincial party. Like it was just such, again, people who really looked into it saw the writing on the wall, and you could see that it was just like a distraction.
yeah.
And because we were picking up a lot of steam, and people were looking for something else, and we would have done a lot better. But again, it was only a year and a half, and of that, maybe 6 months of it was when we were really hitting the pavement hard because Jim finished his chemotherapy, and it's going to be continuing to do the tours and meeting with people and doing the social media and the emails and things like this with you. Like it's going to be a lot of work for the next 4 years, and that's okay because
You
that's
guys are up for it,
for
right?
up for it.
But the one thing I've asked this to a couple other people in your guys' positions, how many politicians actually talk to their constituents?
Um, that's a I don't know. Like there are those who speak to the ones who they know are friendly to them.
Yeah.
Um, that there are those who are very very engaged. And I know ones who are engaged who are from all different parties, like uh parties that I don't necessarily agree with a lot of their policies.
Yeah.
Um, but so a lot of them are very complacent. And what I mean by that is you've got some politicians who have been there for decades, and they're safe because you could literally run your dog as a PC candidate and the dog would win. Like these people, the ridings, they just vote PC all the time. And so when you get individuals like that, I'm not saying all of them,
Yeah.
but so they don't have to try as hard.
Yeah. So
They
so
just don't.
they just kind of roll with the punches and they're just there, right?
But as long as they make their leader happy and to make sure that they don't get kicked out of the party like I did,
Yeah.
then that's all they have to worry about because they will always get their seat. But I never like, yeah, it's great being part of a big party because there's like there's more like there's certain like funding, right? Like you have a bigger machine behind you to help you do things. But at the end of the day, like my constituents were number one. They
Yeah.
elected me, they gave me the job, they had expectations of me, and I took that job very seriously. So it made it for a much busier job,
Yeah.
but I can look at myself in the mirror and say, yeah, I did what I was told to do, like by the people of Cambridge.
Yeah. And I think that the one thing I wanted to touch on too is when they kicked you out of the chamber for the Vax Pass thing, because to me, as somebody looking in on that, like it's so despicable to even it's so petty. Like despicable is one word, but petty, it's so petty. And then the part that bugged me the most about that whole situation was you have this room full of other people, other human beings, and not one of them had the balls or the cojones to even like say, "Hey, man, like shut up. Like we're here to discuss." Like
Yeah.
she's not. She's like this is months and months after this thing has begun. We know that like we know this. We know the virus. Like you're not gonna just catch it. You've presented your negative test. You walked in there. You didn't have COVID,
No.
and it was so petty
It was,
and not one person stood up on your behalf and had any sort of like for like I don't have any other term balls, right? Whether male, female, or whatever the other pronouns they have, I don't know. Uh, no one had any ball. How did that make you feel? Like just as a person, not forget the politics aside, right?
yeah. It was funny because like I knew a battle was coming, right? Like,
Yeah,
so I had got COVID because I refused to disclose my vaccination status. So let's start with that. I
yeah,
refused. I was like, I am not playing this game because me being vaccinated or not doesn't make a difference,
no,
right? It doesn't make a difference. So I'm like, I'm not playing the game. I'm not. And so they were like, and they kept trying to get it from me. Well, but are you vaccinated? I'm like, I'm not telling you. If you need me to test to do my job,
yeah,
I will test to do my job. So I was getting the test and they made it so that way I couldn't even do an at-home test. I had to go to the pharmacy and the pharmacist is a male, so he had to do it.
yeah,
And I remember I had worked really late the Tuesday night. And so I got it done, I think it was Tuesday after work because I had a question the next day at question period. So he goes, he does the swab, and I'm feeling fine. I have a backache, but I've been trying to do handstands because
yeah,
I don't know why it's good for you, right? So
yeah.
like
You just
I'm trying.
just wanna. It's fun. You look cool.
Yeah.
Post it on the internet. You look even better,
So I'm like, okay, so maybe I overdid it, right? I'm like, my back hurts because I'm old and I overdid it with the hand.
right?
So he called me back. He's like, Belinda to the pharmacy. And I'm like, oh, that's weird. And he's like, I want to test again. And I'm like, sure, what's up? He's like, it came back positive, but you look fine. And I'm like, I feel fine. He checks, no fever. He's like, okay, let me do it again. I'm like, okay, he does it again. And so like I'm nervous because I'm like, crap. If I test positive, like because the pharmacist is doing it, he has to report to public health and I have to get
Yeah,
the PCR and I have to skip work for 2 weeks, blah, blah, blah. So I'm like, oh my gosh, this comes back positive again. And he's like, I got to send this into public health. I'm like, I know, like, I'm not going to ask you to not like lie about your job. Of course not.
yeah.
He's like, you got to go get a PCR test. I'm like, crap. So I go home and I tell Jim, I'm like, I tested positive for COVID. He's like, are you joking? I'm like, no, I seriously tested positive.
Yeah.
So I go for my PC. I'm smart. Like I don't keep our kid home from school. You know, we just stay home because we don't need any of that, right? We don't need
Yeah.
anyone being like, hey, she tested positive. She's that farm
Out
boy do
doing it.
shopping.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and I felt like kind of crappy that night, but like nothing crazy. Like I got H1N1 back in '09, and like that was like way worse than COVID for me.
Yeah.
So anyways, go for the PCR on Friday. It was horrible. Like she just jammed it up there. It was awful. And she's like, well, you're asthmatic. So, you know, if you had COVID, you'd probably be in the hospital. She's like, those antigen tests are they can be wrong. And I'm like, okay, right.
Yeah.
Thinking, okay, I'm probably fine. So then Saturday, the doctor calls and he's like, you have COVID-19 and you need to isolate and public health is going to call you. Man, did they call? They called like 3 times. I was on the phone for like an hour with them. And they're like, you know, can your husband, does your husband want to use the quarantine hotel? So
Yeah.
you can, and I was like, what? And
That's
then
the
she goes,
dumbest question ever.
and I'm like, what? No. And then she's like, well, can you sleep somewhere else? I'm like, yeah. She's like, can your kid sleep somewhere else? I'm like, no, like kid, he's attached to me
Yeah.
practically. And then she goes, the nurse says, do you, you know, maybe you shouldn't make meals. Your husband can make the meals. And I'm like, wait a second.
What does that have to do with COVID?
No, but I guess it's good. Actually, she's like, I'm like, so you want me to like stay in bed and let my husband cook meals all day? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, this is great.
Yeah.
So anyway, she didn't appreciate my sense of humor.
Yeah.
Anyway, so 2 weeks quarantine, fine. Jim ended up getting it. He did the monoclonal antibody therapies because he had chemotherapy before, so his body was a little weak.
Yeah.
My little guy got it. It lasted like all of 10 hours. It was like nothing. So I was good. Like you know, and then so they still want me to disclose my vax status at the legislature. And I'm like, nope. So public health sent me this fancy little email saying, hey, guess what? you're clear, and you don't need to test for the next 90 days because you just got over COVID. So you're good to go. And the nurse even said, hey, you could even board a plane with this without
Yeah.
needing a test. Like that's how
Your immunity is all the way up. You're good to go.
fabulous.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm like, great. So now I know the rules. The rules at the legislature was like, either show me that you've been vaxxed or show negative test. I'm like, okay, let's test. I tested, came back negative, took a picture, brought it to the guards. They let me in, following the rules here, right?
Yeah.
And then he called, and you know, the sergeant at arms is like, well, are asking if I'm vaccinated. The nurse is asking me, if, everyone's asking me subtly, just tell me if you're vaccinated. And I'm like, no, I'm not disclosing it.
Yeah.
So anyways, I get there and Ted Arnett, he's like, he calls me out. And I was like, but I was ready. Actually, I was ready. I was like,
Yeah.
you need to go into battle. I'm like, I'm ready for this.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
You knew it was coming. It's like you're
I
getting into a cage to fight. You knew you're about to get into a fight.
100%. And I'm like, let's do this, bring it. And so like you know, made his comment. I stood up, I defended myself, sat back down. He called me out twice and then I got removed. And I was just like staring at him. And I was like, and the protocol is you're supposed to bow to the speaker before you left.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm not bowing.
No,
So
hey, good for you. Don't bow to that.
bow.
You don't bow to bullies. Right?
No,
Right?
like, and the worst part was the mainstream media. It wasn't that an elected official got kicked out of the legislature and can't do her job. It was unvaccinated MPP, and
Yeah.
I'm like, how do you guys know I'm not vaccinated? Have I ever said anything publicly? I've never. And
Yeah.
that was all that everyone cared about. She's unvaccinated. She's not safe. Well, lo and behold, turns out after what, like 5 weeks, people who are fully vaccinated are
Yeah.
not vaccinated anyway because it's done. So like really everyone should have been testing in that chamber, not just me,
Well,
everybody.
I mean, we have this COVID theater. Like, I knew I was gonna get it. Like when the pandemic happened, I'm like, I grapple, I do jujitsu,
Yeah.
I like, I've gotten way worse things than COVID during my life as a martial artist and as a fighter, in terms of sicknesses,
Yeah.
right? Just from doing what we do. So, my wife was well aware. She's like, yeah, you're gonna get it at some point, right? And I'm like, so I did get it, right? And it ran through us. I think it was about 2 or 3 days. I felt like crap. Felt like, when people are like, "What was it like?" I'm like, "Well, it felt like a donkey coming kick me in my back. Like my back was aching."
Me too.
Yeah, yeah, I got the
Yeah.
back one, and you know, it was that was it. And I have at the time my son was probably 1.5, and my daughter was 2.5, 3 years old. We're not gonna get, like, we can't isolate. Like, we live in a condo. We're like
Yeah.
okay, so they 100% got it, but it was
Oh,
like for them it was like a little teeny, like, oh, they're hot. Okay, it was like a day and a half.
yeah.
Why I'm kind of bringing this story up is like I did the antibody test, so the blood test to kind of see my antibodies, right?
Nice.
And because I wasn't convinced that with all the COVID theater going on that I needed to do these jabby thingies, right? So I tested through the roof. My antibodies through the roof. So I called my doctor and I'm like, okay, doctor. And he's like, I'm not an immunologist, but he's like, those are significant levels. And I'm like, and this was about 8 months after
Mm.
I had COVID. So he's like,
Really that long?
yeah, that long. And he's like, those are significant levels. And I'm like, well, what would be the benefit to getting a vaccine now? And he's like, with the levels that your blood showed, there would be no benefit, right? And he's like, I'm just being honest. I know he's like, I know that there's a lot of the pushing out there of this and that, and so I'm like, well, why don't they tell people that, right? Why don't they tell people, like, if you have a natural infection, you can go do an antibody. If you test low and you want to, maybe go get a shot for your own, peace of mind, sure, go ahead. But it was, and to jump through the hoops just to get the blood test, right? Because before it was you can simply print it out and go. Now you need a doctor requisition to get a blood test for some that I'm paying for. It's not like it's a blood test that's a part of OHIP and OHIP
No.
covers it and
Look it.
I'm paying for this and I
Yeah.
have to get a doctor requisition. It doesn't make any sense. And
No.
my wife did hers in December, right? And it was just pure curiosity. We haven't used these papers for anything. It was just like, fuck it, let's see what your levels are. Hers are like 16 times mine, right?
No
So,
way. That's
right, and I know she's got some superhuman, and she doesn't even do jujitsu and all that crap, right? So the COVID theater and that is going on, and then the part to me about that your whole story and that whole situation that is very despicable is not one human being had the audacity to say that what you were doing is wrong and what you're doing is what's undemocratic. You're kicking out an elected official when she followed the rules, and I guarantee you there were other people in the room that didn't follow the rules. That
Oh, people were looking at their shoes. Like they were so uncomfortable.
yeah,
Because it is ridiculous. Like
and
it's
it
just,
And I think it's important that we talk about this because those are the kind of people that you guys we put in parliament. Those are the people who are supposed to be there standing up for people,
yeah,
standing up for other individuals and the rights of other people, and that's what they did to a coworker,
yeah.
right? And I think that that's really important to point out. Like anyone can say whatever, mainstream media can point out whatever they want. What that showed is there's a very big lack of character in Queens Park, and it can't simply be fixed with new voting. It has to be fixed with these people need to go.
Yeah, there's a lot of like party first, people second type mentality, which is really dangerous. And that's just taken over. I think federally too. Like it's taken over. And it because I talk to like I'm chatty, as you can tell.
Yes.
And like I talk to NDPs, talk to liberal, talk to the green guy, talk to other PCs, and like, they'll say they don't agree with this, that, or the other thing, or but they just won't vote outside of party lines. And it's so unfortunate because nothing really gets done at that point, right?
Yeah.
What ends up happening is you have more members, you get your agenda through it. Like there's no real debate because at the end of the day, you're not changing anyone's mind because these people are going to vote the way the leader wants them to, the leader and his lobbyists want them to, right? So
Yeah.
it's really unfortunate. And I was really hoping that, I mean, in next elections in 4 years, like maybe we'll get some seats then, but just to actually put some actual opposition into that chamber, because right now it's pretty lackluster.
Yeah.
Like they kind of all agree on everything.
And the one thing I kind of wanted to touch on is like by this point, people are tired of politics. They're tired of seeing politics. They're tired of being told what to do. They're tired of lockdowns. They're tired of all those kind of things. But knowing that Doug Ford still has the power to
Yeah.
institute lockdowns, um, as a party now that you have your foot in the ground, you're established, what can you kind of do to kind of keep people's focus over the next 4 years on the important issues? Because right now people are just like, well, everyone's the same. We're all the same. It's going to be another lockdown probably. They're bringing back the COVID theory. We're in the 30th wave. You know, all politicians are liars. How do you kind of go about the next 4 years to change that kind of attitude when people are just so tired of the narrative and the ongoing lying that they've been fed?
So the commitment that I've made and that we've made is to stay on top of what's going on in the Ontario legislature. So as I mentioned before, I read everything, and I actually enjoy reading the legislation because it's amazing how much is hidden. Like, and it could just be like a great bill and then a tiny little line where it's like, oh my gosh, this is awful.
Yeah.
So I'll be continuing to read all of the bills that cross that table and doing what we did for the last 2.5 years when I got kicked out of the PC party, which is broadcasting that. And because again, what's happened for the last forever is that like legislation goes through, no one really broadcasts it, and it just goes through. And then years later, you're like, oh, hey, how did this happen? And how come we don't have, you know, gender on my kid's health card anymore? It doesn't exist. Like all these things that happen because no one brought it to light. So we'll be keeping our eyes on them
Yeah.
and broadcasting it and the call to action. So we did that a number of times, and we saw change occur, whether that was getting the marriage code of conduct removed from a bill, whether it was getting the PCs to remove their support for Bill 67. We were able to broadcast that message to our supportive base, and then they share it with their friends, who then sometimes end up joining the new blue base as well, which ends up growing our base.
Yeah.
And then they engage and they call and they email the MPPs. And at the end of the day, politicians, they want to be liked. And if
Yes.
there's a lot of angry people calling them and emailing them, especially people who have in the past given them any type of financial support,
Yeah.
you will see how quickly they will change their minds. And so we just got to keep it up. And yes, it's exhausting, but that's what's expected of us now. And we've made that commitment. We've created a political party, and and we are in this to for the long run, and like to get the job done. And so
Yeah,
we're doing it.
and I think one of the things you just said there kind of leads into what I wanted to chat to you about was the financial part,
Mm.
because I think after the last 3 4 years, people's eyes are open to how special interest groups, um, to put it lightly, unions, different groups of people are financially driven to vote for certain parties, support certain parties, to lobby for certain parties, and to basically pay for the funding of certain parties. Um, which, when you break it down, pretty much defeats the purpose of the average person voting. When special interest groups are involved in how a party situates their politics, how their policies, for example, teachers unions, they're they flip flop. If the NDP says they're going to do something, well, we're gonna fund them. And so it actually detracts the value, like, of a regular voter's vote when these people get involved in politics and involved with these parties. Now, I know it's quite a generic question, but how do we kind of break this barrier down so that this can't happen anymore?
So yeah, that the teachers union one is a really good example because you're right. They'll go between the Liberals and the NDP. Whoever is saying the things that they want to hear or whatever the case is. And we've even seen, like, I think the NDP ran a former union leader for the, I don't want to get it wrong. I want to say ETFO, the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario. Could be wrong, but anyways, he ran in Brantford Brant. You can see, like, there's an alignment there, right? Where you
Yeah,
have like these unions which are supposed to be apolitical, who clearly have a lean to them. And we see that even with our school trustees, unfortunately. And then, I there are a lot of teachers, 'cause we'll stick with the example of teachers that are great and they totally see it for what it is, and they're going to vote the way they want to vote.
yeah,
And then there are the ones who are drinking the Kool-Aid and are just like on a different page than where you and I are on.
yeah,
And then they'll say, well, we have family and friends and they'll vote our way. And we can't get distracted by stuff like that. And it's frustrating because it's like, it's scary. You're like, oh, it's a big union and they've got 40,000 members, or whatever the number is.
yeah,
But at the end of the day, it's like that really is a distraction. You've got to look at how your party, or how your people are doing, and what the policies that they have, and you got to focus on that and spread that message. Because a lot of people who are like, I'm pro teacher, like, I love my
yeah,
son has great teachers, and the issue usually is with the union. And so again, it's coming back down to those conversations. I think people are more open to having these types of conversations now, especially sticking to the teacher topic,
yeah,
with COVID and having to do computer school, as my son called it.
yeah.
He hated it.
Oh
Like,
my
he
God.
hated
It's
being
the,
on.
it's the worst way of learning possible.
Oh,
Uh,
especially
and
for like a kid, right?
and the fact that they even thought it was like a legitimate learning style is laughable. That they have zero connect of actually
Oh,
how kids learn, or how the community, like, they have zero. Sometimes, like, I don't want to get off topic, but, like, we look at the stuff that's happened in the last years, and the people are telling me about my health,
mm,
like like I'm literally a professional athlete. I run a training business on how to, and I have, I'm gonna say it's my, again, it's my, this fat shit Doug Ford telling me about my health. Before you even want to tell me about my health and protecting it, run a lap, right? So, um, sorry, right?
no, but it's true. It's like, don't go outside, put a mask on your face,
Yeah,
like, we're
and
gonna.
and so then going back to the teacher thing, when they came up with that strategy for learning for kids, I'm like, did you ever go to school, or did you go to private school where they shunned you from that? And
Hmm.
I'm referring to Leche because I'm pretty sure he went to private school. He didn't go to regular school,
He
if I
did.
have my facts correct.
He did.
So I went to public school. I know for 100% fact learning online is stupid. I did it. It didn't work. I didn't learn anything. I don't remember anything. And so the fact that they even went there and said that there was a great idea, and I've had a teacher on this exact podcast before, and he said that his students were at least 8 months behind.
Oh, it's so bad. Like, I saw it with my little guy, he hated it. And then a lot of parents were home and listening to what the teachers were teaching. And a lot of them were like, well, hang on, what did he just say?
Yeah.
So you saw what they were learning and what they weren't learning. And I know, and I get that the people that I know, there's a bias to it, right? I get
Yeah.
it because, but like a lot of people have pulled their kids from the public system and are either private schooling if they can afford it, or they're doing learning pods or homeschooling. So it's changed a lot. And I'm talking about people who were on the different side before, who
Yeah.
have now come to the side being like, oh, maybe homeschooling isn't that bad actually, because of everything that they saw. So it's yeah, going back to your question. Sorry, I'm really bad at like veering off to
It's
different
okay.
directions. So yeah, special interest groups, they got big dollars. They can spend. They could try to influence elections with radio ads. Sometimes they're effective, sometimes they're not. I think a lot of
I
people.
think the important question that people want to know is how do we get rid of that? Because I don't think that that should be allowed. Like, I know that you guys were advocating to get rid of it, right? But how do we go about getting rid of that? Because it seems like if we're talking about democracy, having other special groups campaigning for parties is doesn't mean like it's just follow the money. It's a money driven thing.
Yeah, a lot of, and one gentleman I spoke to was like, why can't we see how much unions are spending on political activism and things like that? Because I
Yeah.
don't think we can actually see that, right?
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, that would require legislation. And I know that the unions would totally be up in arms with that. But that would require legislation, and that would require Doug, because that's who's in power right now,
Yeah.
unfortunately. But the PCs would have to do something. And
Which he's not gonna do.
I mean, probably not
No, so basically what we have to keep doing is talking about it, bring it to awareness and
talking about it. Yeah.
get the people in those positions to actually make that change, right?
Yeah, and that's it. And it's about, pen to paper, or I guess we don't do that as much anymore, but like
Yeah.
emails and phone calls and just constantly engaging. Like I know a lot of people, and I kept saying this last year, people were getting exhausted with the Reopening Ontario Act. They're like, oh, I've been emailing and they don't respond. And I'm like, okay, they're not responding because this is the long game. Like they're like, they want you to get frustrated and feel like no one's listening. So you just stop.
Yeah.
You don't stop, right? Like it's annoying, but just don't stop. Send your email. Send it. Let them know and tell your friends to send emails because it is exhausting. Like we would get them at the office too, and we would try to respond. Some people are just trolling, so you kind of ignore those ones when they get
Yeah.
really like aggressive and disgusting. But keep it respectful, especially if it's your MPP. You're entitled to a meeting with him or her, and ask for that meeting and find out like why, where they stand on issues like this. That's important, and that's what you pay them to do. Like they make six figures, man. Like
Yeah.
knock on their door, get a
Yeah.
meeting.
6 figures. That's a lot of money that is taxpayer funded, which means they got to
Yeah.
do that work to earn that wage.
And it's a safe job, right? Like they're in it. It's 4 years where you can't get fired.
Yeah.
Like think about that. Like they can't. The only thing they can do is get kicked out of their party, but they can't get fired. So while everyone else is losing their job because they didn't get vaccinated or whatever the case is, they're sitting pretty. Like
Yeah.
you can't. It's
Well,
safe.
I always say this to people over the last 3 years, is politicians didn't miss a paycheck, but
No, they did not take a
regular
paycheck.
people did.
Yeah,
Regular people did, and we were forced to sit at home and be like, okay, I got to take CERB in order to, which for some people, that was nowhere near enough. It was nowhere near anything that they were making at their jobs, and it was nowhere near enough. Now, I wanted to circle back to where we were talking about education because I know you spoke about the critical race theory in
yeah.
schools, and so I want to circle back even further to where we talk about that city TV propaganda LGBTQ lady where they or SQ whatever other. I'll keep doing that because I can do that. I don't care. They can't cancel me. I don't care.
It reminds me of one of the American podcasters, and he says the alphabet people.
Yeah, the alphabet people. That
Yeah,
and there'll be an XYZ in there next week. Don't worry about it. But even in that, where it had nothing to do with you guys in the New Blue Party, they spent criticizing that. Critical race theory isn't in schools, and then lo and behold, I think it was last week or even
yeah.
this week. It was at was it Ontario teachers?
ETFO again, ETFO. Yeah.
Yeah, where they're trying to teach kids about white privilege,
Uh-huh.
which to like I'm a brown guy, but I'm married to a white woman,
Yeah.
and to me it's super offensive. It's super disgusting and it's super
Yeah.
offensive because I'm raising two kids that when they go to school, they're now going to be taught that their mom is special and different because she's white.
right?
which is disgusting,
Yes. So
right? And so I want you to kind of expand on what you were fighting for with that bill, so people understand.
yeah. So, and this is what frustrates me. So again, my dad's Trinidadian, right? Like I lived in Trinidad. Like I have family members who are black, brown, Chinese. Like we got a big callaloo, my family.
Yeah,
We're all kind of colors.
to use Callaloo, I like it.
And like, so when people talk privilege, like, do you understand? My dad came to this country with like nothing
Yeah,
and built himself up with his thick Trini accent and dealt with all kinds of stuff. My mom came here from Portugal, couldn't speak a lick of English. She cleaned bathrooms. Okay.
yeah,
That is not privilege.
no, by
Those
no
are
means.
two people coming here for a better life who worked their tails off to give me and my brothers a good life so that I could go to post secondary education. Right.
Yeah,
So when I hear because of the amount of melanin in my skin that I didn't get enough from my dad's side, that I have white privilege, and that my little guy is very fair, he's got blonde hair,
yeah,
okay, and his papa, my dad, is Trinidadian,
yeah.
but because he looks
A
a
certain
certain way
way.
that he's like that is infuriating to me because it is like a kick in the face to my parents who worked so hard.
Yeah,
And it's like, and when I tell people, I'm like, my parents are immigrants, and like in the black side of my family came to Trinidad from Africa on slave boats.
yeah.
And like I've had this conversation with people, and they're just like, well, yeah, well, the Portuguese, they invaded Goa, so like you guys are like slaves. And I'm just like, this is the conversations you have with these people. Like they don't even listen to the fact that like they're trying to paint like their arguments are in itself racist because they're painting an entire swath of a population with one brush based on like the rulers at the time
Yeah.
related to what were those people who invaded Goa. Like,
Well, I believe there's a term for it. It's called presentism, where you try to punish people from the past or for like crimes of the past in the present, which is really it's like a false narrative because you end up trying to delete history instead of learning from it.
yes,
And then what ends up happening is you repeat history because you tried to delete it, right?
exactly.
And I want and like you were saying about your family, I want to take that even further because like my wife's family, they're white as hell, right? They're as white as her dad. They're Irish and British, right? But I want to give people a background of like when as I got to know them and know their history and when they were in this country, they were broke, right? My wife's father worked as a taxi cab driver. He did all sorts of different odd jobs. Um, to get to a point where he can go to school and he
Mhm.
studied ministry and then he became a pastor. And for those people who don't know, pastors don't make a crap load of money.
No.
It's not a glamorous job in terms of finances, but the pathway from him to get there was that of a broke person to, they have a middle class life now. Nowhere in that story is there privilege,
No,
right?
not at all.
And because of their skin color, now we're gonna say that they have had it. We're gonna assume that they have had it, and then, yeah, and then let's just assume that they had privilege. So now we're going down the slippery slope where we're trying to teach this to our kids,
Yes.
and people are okay with that. And like, can you tell people how you were fighting against it with the CRT bill?
Yeah. So the Bill 67, so Laura May Lindo, she got reelected. She's NDP, Kitchener Center MPP, and she put through this bill, very simple, like 7 pages, really, really simple bill. Um, and basically wanting to redefine racism. And she wanted to have it so that way there was subconscious racism. So,
What does that even mean?
I would love, so basically they wanted to hire these special people to tell you what that means. And then basically if your child exhibited subconscious racism or if the teacher did or whatever, then they could be fined because they use the term people could be fined. So it was like, and I'm just like, what, how do you like put a bill like this and think it's a good idea? And everyone voted in favor of this bill. And I'm thinking, did any of you read the bill, or do you just like you don't read it, or you read it and you thought it was hunky dory?
Well, basically, they were like, "Oh, racism is bad. Let's vote for the bill." Right?
Racism is bad.
Yeah.
Racism is horrible, and it still exists today. I'm not, saying any that it doesn't, but that bill does nothing to counter racism.
No.
Nothing. In
And
fact, it actually encourages it because now you've got like kids who that are now saying, well, I'm a victim and you're an oppressor, And if you don't do this or say this, and like it is just awful. And people are saying it's not in the curriculum now. It is.
Yeah.
And I got a poem sent to me by a mom in the region. I'm in the Waterloo region, and it was this poem written by a kid. I think he was East Indian, and he sent it to all the students. And it was basically like, if you're not an ally, you're an enemy. If you don't admit that you're colonizers, it was just like crazy. And I'm thinking the teacher let him
Let it
pass
happen.
this out, and it wasn't a bad thing. Like the teacher was fine with it. And it's like when I grew up, so I grew up in like the 80s and the 90s. I told you I'm old. And so like we learned that skin color doesn't matter. Like you don't look at
Exactly.
someone's skin color, right? It's the quality of their character. And now we're teaching our kids that we want to look at skin color. That's what matters first. And I'm going to treat you differently based on your skin color. Like, how does anyone not see that in itself as racism?
Very exactly. And
It,
this very notion that we can like you said, racism is out there. Like
totally.
the very notion that we can eliminate racism is false logic in itself.
Yeah.
There are shitty people in the world. There are
There
shitty
always will be.
There always will be. There's going to be people who are racist. There's going to be, but the way to counter them, like I always say, is with love, showing them that nothing matters in terms of skin color. But by going through with these kind of things, we actually are enforcing that behavior.
Mm.
That skin color does, like you said, skin color does matter, and when it shouldn't. And like when I grew up, nobody cared about that.
No.
And now it's like, why all of a sudden is this an issue that was in schools? Like when I was in school, nobody talked about that. If you're white, you're white. You're black, you're black. You're brown, you're brown. We all played. We played football. We tackled each other. We played Pokemon cards, whatever the hell we were doing, and nobody gave a damn. Now all of a sudden, we're trying to tell kids that you have to pay attention to the other person's skin color.
So bad.
It's and like going back to that piece, they were like, oh, the new blue party is bad because they endorse CRT. It's not in school. Well, it is there.
It is there. It's totally there. And it's like the teachers have the flexibility to teach to teach these things. If it comes up, they can teach it. So there's so much power in the individual teacher. So it's in the curriculum, but maybe you got a great teacher and they're not going to talk about it. Maybe you have another one who's got this agenda, because some of them are fairly political, right? And then they've got, I mean, the stories, if you had like 3 hours, the stories I could share with you is just like, it blows my mind.
Well,
Like, and
give me one. We don't have 3 hours, but give me one.
we don't have 3 hours. Like there was the gender unicorn out in Guelph.
Oh,
Some
yeah.
guy said that I think it was his grade 2. He came home and he was like, we learned about a gender unicorn. And I was like, what is that? Like the different genders, and you can be different things, and you could be, and like, you know what? You want to have those conversations with your kid, fill your boots. It's your kid.
Yeah.
I am not comfortable with a stranger, whether it's a teacher or not, talking to my kid about certain subjects at certain ages. Like I've said this to people, like, you know what? Those conversations can be had in high school, not in elementary school.
Well,
And
in
like,
grade two, their brain has nowhere near any sort of development to understand. Like,
no,
my daughter's like, I'm like, she goes to the washroom now because she's potty trained. She's getting ready to go to kindergarten. We're like, okay, wipe your vag. Like what? Like, Daddy, I wipe my vag. And he's like, "What?" And then, like, or like, I'll be like, what's the difference between you and your brother? I got vag. My brother, she calls him buddy. She's like, buddy's got penis, right? So like, that's their basic understanding of
basic
just
biological
human
difference.
anatomy, right? And then to throw in that you can be this, you can be you can identify I almost want to just walk around and troll people and be like, yeah, I identify as a hippopotamus today, so just call me hippopotamus Ashley, please. Right?
And
It's gone to that point though.
you hear these stories, right? And you hear the stories, and it's just like, it's sad. It's really sad. And you wonder why people are pulling their kids out of school. You wonder why there's so much divisiveness. Like the
Yeah.
last 2 years, it seems like it just blew up the last 2 years, right? So it's like between you're not wearing a mask, and you do wear a mask, and you're vaccinated. Like all of that. And then you add on now the education piece where it's like, and then that Bill 67, which is trying to make it sound like racism is just like exploding everywhere in every
Yeah.
school system. And yes, it's there, but the system itself is not systemically racist. Like
That's what I
it
was
is,
about to say. Right?
and that's what she's trying to paint. And so I was the only one that voted against it. And then we put it out there on social media and the emails that the new Blue Party did, and people started to respond. to the PC party. And then I asked a question in question period, and they finally relented. They're like, we're not going to support the bill, which was a big win. But new 43rd legislature has started August 8th. It's back.
Yeah.
And Laura May has already said she's going to retable the bill. And so I'm going to be watching.
Yeah.
I want to see if the PCs are going to support it, because if you watch the debates, or if you go onto the Hansard and you want to go to sleep and you want to read that before bed, the PCs who spoke in favor of her bill, they spoke in favor. Sam Osterhoff,
Yeah.
who was the PA parliamentary assistant, pardon me, for education, he spoke in favor of it. So like, are these guys conservative or are they not? Are they
Yeah.
reading the bills or are they not? Like, just because your name is PC progressive conservative, like it doesn't actually mean anything. Like we've been saying, they're the left, the new provincial wing of the federal liberals. Like
Yeah,
it's awful.
well, and it's true, and the same thing can be said for federally as well, because we saw that with O'Toole, where he said all the right things at the start when he first got in, then as things got closer and closer to election, the lefter and lefter he went, right?
Yeah.
Um, is it the new blue strategy to continue just to stay in your lane and not like? I think one of the things that, when I talked to Max, he brought this up, and I see it in all parties. So I'm not kind of singling out liberals or conservatives or whatever.
Mm.
When you get closer to an election, obviously there's talking points that
Yeah.
are popular. And then what ends up happening is you end up straying from your values that you initially had, and you go towards those talking points and changing policies because it's what's popular at the time. Is it the new blue, you know, gonna follow along suit of that, or is it you guys, these are your values, this is your platform, we're sticking to it, and there's not going to be any change?
So I think what you see is what you get. And that's what I would tell people all the time. Like, where I stand on stuff, because I've said it. I've either written it in articles, or I've said it in the legislature, or I'll say it to your face. But like everything I stand for, I have said it publicly.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm not going to shy away from it. I refuse to apologize to the woke mob. Like I'm not doing that. Like
Yeah.
I have principles and morals and values that I stand for, and all of our candidates feel the same way. And the party, like, we're not we're not that type. We're not bending to the woke mob. And that's what the CPC, the federal conservatives and the provincial conservatives, that's what they do. They
Yeah.
just bend with the wind. And a lot of people are sick and tired of it, because some people are voting for them because they feel like there's no other choice. And I'm here to say there is another choice provincially.
Yeah.
There is. And we are going to continue to grow. We got over 125,000 votes last election, which was like pretty huge. And we're just going to keep going. And I mean, like, I don't see a change for the PC party, to really and truly. Like, it's the same people that are running the show all the time, no matter who the leader is. It's the same
Yeah.
guys in the back.
And before we kind of wrap things up, I like to ask a lot of people in your position about this because it's not talked about. I come from the health and fitness industry, which over the last 3 years has just been crapped on, right?
Yeah.
In terms of just, shutdowns, we're the main cause of spreading, all that kind of lingo, all that kind of crap. Um, but lo and behold, it's people like me and people in our industry that are the ones that are keeping people healthy,
Yes.
right? We always like to talk about healthcare. We need to invest in healthcare. Well, when you go to the hospital, that's sick care. You go there because you're sick. You don't go to the hospital because you're healthy. You don't go to the hospital because you feel great. I'm gonna go to the hospital today. No, like you understand. Like it's I'm not even like it's sick care, and I'm not putting that sector down. We need them, and we need them to function at their highest, and we need them to be funded and all that jargon. But actual healthcare are the things that what we're doing. We're
Yes.
providing services for people to take care of their health. Where physiotherapists are helping people get back to health, like when Jim went through his thing. Where massage therapists help people get rid of all those are healthcare practitioners. Um, Now it's not common in anybody's platform because it's not popular. Like I said that to Max too. It's not in their platform either. What does the New Blue look to do in terms of helping with that industry and propping it up? Because I want to keep going with this because I also played football at an extremely high level.
Mhm.
Now, when we look at the province of Ontario, we have a gigantic province, tons of talent athletically. when you ask a kid, oh, he plays hockey, he plays football, or whatever sport, what do you want to do? Oh, well, I want to play in the NCAA,
Yeah.
right? Their immediate say that I want to play at college in the US
Yeah.
because in Canada it's not funded. In Ontario it's not funded. They don't say I want to go play in the OUA for, the UFT, right? They don't say I want to go to McMaster and play football for McMaster. They say I want to go to, play for UCLA, right? What can you guys do as a party to help, maybe I know budgeting and all that kind of has its role, but to reinvest in Ontario, to reinvest in kids, amateur programs, paid coaches, so that we can have a system where, you know, we're not exporting people out of our country, out of our province.
Yeah.
We're keeping talent here. We're building talent. And in the long run, what that adds to is like you have professional sport organizations that want to be here, that say, let's add teams to Canada. Let's add teams to Toronto. Let's add teams to Winnipeg. Let's add teams to all these major hubs.
Yeah.
It's a lost conversation, but all it takes is a little bit of money and some love from the governments. But they seem to just don't want to do it. What can our community look for in the New Blue to do something about that?
So I have a couple of responses for that. So one, I was the only one that spoke up to fight for the gyms to not be closed.
Yeah,
And I brought evidence from the Journal of Sports Medicine, people who were doing 20 minutes of exercise, like the bare minimum that they recommend,
yeah,
had better outcomes, less severe COVID, got better quicker. So there was no evidence, there's no reason to shut down our gyms um, at all, like at all. And I'm someone, I like to work out. I think being physically fit is very important. Eating well, getting outside, fresh air, vitamin D, all that stuff is extremely important. So that that part is just to tell you, like, I agree with you. Like
yeah.
it's so important because it's prevention. Like, why wait till we get sick? Like, why don't just prevent that and as
If
much as you possibly can, right?
like the logic thing is, if you want to prevent our hospitals from being overrun, make people more healthy and less
Yeah.
dependent on healthcare, right?
Yes. And the second piece is the education piece. So we don't actually, unless that's changed, we don't focus enough on that. Like we talk about, like, oh, the food pyramid, right? Well, that's been changed, right? I don't know how healthy that is now.
Well,
It probably is.
it's flawed to
It,
10 degrees from an
right.
expert, from myself to tell him like it's not real, like it's not a thing,
It's
right?
it's not. And like, what are they including crickets on it now? Like we got those cricket factories in
Yeah,
London. Like, don't get me started. It's not real protein. But anyway, so it's the education piece, with in terms of like healthy lifestyle, nutrition, and there's also like a pride piece. And I'm not using pride in like a bad sense. I'm meaning like being proud of your country, of your province, and what we have to offer, the talent we have to offer, and how we can make it grow. Because when you get that emotional feeling with something,
yeah,
that's how you make it grow. So like we can fund all these things, right? That's something that can be done. But if people still don't have that emotional desire, then it's not really going to do anything, right? So
yeah,
you've got to start and like get kids to understand, like, yeah, we live in a great country, we live in a great province. There's a lot of talent here, and like, let's grow, let's do some homegrown talent,
yeah.
and let's make something of it and show the rest of the world, like, we've got some amazing people here. So I think we do need to start there as well.
Can we
Right.
look forward to the New Blue Party to have something in their platform to help with that and to do some sort of funding for that in the
We've got
future?
4 years, man. We can do lots of development in four
Because
years.
I think like when we look at parties and voting and all that kind of stuff, one of the industries that is often looked over is the fitness and health industry.
Yeah, it is.
We are a huge voting base, and I think that it's without question that if a party came forward and said they were going to significantly inject money into these programs, which is not like I'm not lobbying for extra money. I'm saying this is money for like to make things better, to make people healthier, to relieve our healthcare system, to do if a party actually came along and said they were doing it, I think it would go a long way for them and for the health and fitness industry. Is that something we can look forward to?
I think that's a really good conversation to have, actually, because like the entire healthcare system needs a complete gutting, in my humble opinion.
Yeah,
We need them, but we know that it's not functioning at 100%. Like, how many emergency rooms have closed in the last week alone?
yeah,
But it, again, it comes back to like what you're saying, like the preventative piece. and like the gyms and the health, that health sector, the true health sector, right?
Yeah.
How do we get people there? How do we make that part of it to get people engaged? Because a lot of people, I mean, I don't know what the gyms are like now, but
They're
closing
they're,
them
they're
down.
booming. Like
Oh yeah.
we're heading into a recession pretty
Yeah.
much, or we're already in one, and it's one of the industries that typically that does get affected by recession. That, in my opinion, won't get affected this time.
I really hope you're right.
Well, I know I'm right for this one fact is that people missed that communities
Yeah.
that they had, and they're not going to give it up.
Good.
And it's growing, but at the same time, we lost a lot during those 3 years, the last 3 years. We
A
lost
lot.
a lot of people, a lot of good people.
Yeah.
I mean, um, I can give many examples from martial arts communities for, but I'm sure like in gyms in terms of fitness, health facilities, people who do massage, physio, all that kind of stuff. We lost a lot of good people, and I think what we need is we need a party that's willing to step up for that industry and really speak for Ontarians that are in those industries.
And even the mental health aspect to that. I don't
Yeah.
know if a lot of people realize that, yes, you go to the gym, you work out for your like cardiovascular and everything, but there's a big mental health piece to that as well. And I know tons of people who were, I don't want to use the word depressed because I know that that's an actual clinical term.
No,
People that
they were depressed. They were depressed.
it
Let's be
was
honest.
bad. Like a
Yeah.
lot of people were in really bad shape because they needed to go to the gym to get their endorphins up. They needed to go to feel better about themselves.
Or go
Like,
to their Zumba class or whatever the
oh yeah,
case it was, right? Yeah.
yeah, and these are things like if you don't go to the gym or if you've never been to a gym, like you don't really get it.
Yeah.
And I think there's a large portion of the population that don't really get it. But it's so valuable. Like it's so much more than going to work out. There is a community, like you said. There's a mental health piece to it. It's great. Like if whether or not you want to go outside and do your exercise is fine, but like it is a piece that was missing during the three lockdowns that I think made things that much worse. How could telling people to stay home and not work out make you better?
Yeah.
I
Uh,
don't know.
anyway, I just wanted to say anyway, let's wrap this up, and I just wanted to say thank you for doing this, and can you just let everybody know where they can reach out to you, where they can find you guys, where they can and see all the things that you guys are doing?
Yes, absolutely. So newblueontario.com is our website. We are on Telegram, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. I don't think I'm missing any other social media gram things.
They're on everything.
We're trying to be on everything. We keep it busy. But yeah, sign up for our emails if you want to hear what we're doing. We are doing some, we just finished some municipal webinars, people who want to get involved municipally, whether that's councils or school boards. We did two of those already to get people engaged. We want to try to get this province back on track and, helping people get involved at the local level is a part of that. But we are not keeping our eye off of the provincial legislature either. So we're keeping busy and would love to have you guys join.
All right, thank you for doing what you're doing, and that's it for us. Thank you, and thanks again, Belinda.
Thanks, Ashton. It was such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
No problem.